Normal Scottish morning, people heading to work, tourists taking photos.
And in about 5 seconds, everything can change. So what would you do if Edinburgh got new? Global tensions are rising once again. In this video, we uncover the history of Edinburgh's defense system, wartime battles, explore what you can do to stay safe, and go inside the legendary Barnton Bunker. 2nd of April 1916, giant shadows glide over the sleeping Edinburgh. 2 Zeppelins unleashed hell on Leith Docks. Bombs ripped through the night. 24 blasts, 13 lives snuffed out of their beds. Kids among the dead. Terror rippled through the streets. Monsters from the sky. Scotland's first taste of aerial dread. 16 October 1939, calm Firth of Forth, 12 German bombers on their way, targeting British warships at Rosyth. Edinburgh watches as Spitfires roll up from 603 Squadron, twisting in deadly dodge fights that blight the sky. 3 Nazis plummet into the sea. On the ground, 16 souls are gone forever. April 1941, darkness over Leith, then hellfire, bombs smash schools. Homes, dock workers vanish into the rubble, families huddling in shadows as the sky rains death, invisible until it's too late. Nowhere was truly safe. I know, dear friend. It feels like history is repeating itself. The creepy chill might already be climbing your spine, but hold your horses. Edinburgh itself is very unlikely to be directly targeted. It doesn't hold any military value that makes it first strike, so calm down. North of Edinburgh, around Queensferry and the Firth of Forth, you got the bridges and the transport corridors. Rosyth, a strategic naval dockyard and logistic hub on all their nuclear target lists. Further west, on the Clyde, things are even more serious. This is where HMNB Clyde at Firth hosts the UK nuclear submarine fleet, one of the highest value military targets on the entire country. The Clyde is where they bite first. But let's say the sirens go and the government really does give you those 4 promised minutes. Maybe what do you actually do? Grab anything that can tune to the radio frequency, phone with FM, battery radio, whatever you can get fast. Official instruction, if they come, will be broadcast. You won't have time to scroll social media. Close and seal all the windows and doors as best you can. Curtains, blinds, even tape or towels. Move to the inner part of the building, away from external walls and windows. If you can go underground, a basement, a car park level or cellar, go. If you're lucky and your building survives the distant blast and shockwave, stay in shelter for many hours, not minutes. Turn on BBC radio at the top of every hour. Listen for the new guidance, then switch off to save batteries. And here is the part nobody likes to admit. After that first message, you are mostly on your own. Governments plan for response and recovery, but at the street level, no one is coming to hold your hand in the first hours and days. Today's nuclear weapons come in a few main flavors: strategic warheads on missile carried by submarines, meant for cities and bases, and smaller tactical warheads designed for battlefields. The first burst of radiation happens in seconds, but the real long-term danger is fallout. Radioactive dust thrown into the mushroom cloud and thrown back over land. Radiation drops fast at first. The 7 to 10 rule, every 7-fold increase in time cuts the level by about 10, though it's not 6-7 rule, which is why the first 48 hours indoors matter so much. This whole story is also part of my sendmeonadventure.com for the Edinburgh Children's Hospital charity. If you wanna know more and support what I do, check the website to get the actual grip on our future. We have to understand the systems that were built to survive the last possible ending. That's why I reach out to the Barnton Bunker, the preservation project, the charity restoring Edinburgh's old nuclear command bunker. I arrived to this quiet compound in an old quarry, the surface looking almost ordinary. The feeling of the Cold War is still in the air down there, and for the rest of the story, I'm going to step aside and let Logan, volunteer tour guide, take you inside. Oh, and the Barnton Bunker, definitely 5 stars. Thank you for having me.
Hope you're all well, Steve. My name is Logan, and we are getting this afternoon from the most secret and extraordinary Cold War historical sites in all of Britain, one of Scotland's most ambitious grassroots restoration projects, the Barnton Bunker. Our bunker here has a fairly layered history, but its origins began as an RAF operations hub for the course of the Second World War, links to nearby RAF Turnhouse, today's Edinburgh Airport. Here sat the work from the surface building, which sits just over there, to plot enemy ranks, the facility crucial for Britain's overall air defence for the course the Second World War. By the end of the Second World War, though, an icy tension began to set in between East and West. And for 1951 and 1952, this site was transformed into a vast R4 class rotor bunker, but only 4 could be put across the UK, sold to the Sector Operations Centre for all of Scotland, the job to direct air defences against the Soviet bombers. With the coming of the 60s though, bombers were replaced by missiles. This site was once again transformed, this time into Scotland's regional seat government, for Westminster to be destroyed, then Scotland's leaders, silk servants, and even the royal family that were north of the border would all be brought here to ensure the governance of the country could continue unhindered in the event of a nuclear disaster. Given by the fact that we're all standing here today though, we know that a nuclear disaster did not come pat, but a disaster of a different kind would come to strike our bunker here in the 1990s, that ravaged by fires, death and vandalism, that left it as a blackened ruin, a treasure trove of history beneath. Eventually the site would be acquired for just £60,000, even less than the price of a flat in Edinburgh, and a figure that pales in comparison to the near £50 million of today's money it would cost to construct this site. Since 2011, a dedicated team of volunteers here are working tirelessly to preserve this treasure trove of history, to bring it back to life. But still, as we go beneath the surface today, you'll get to see many of the scars of destruction and how we've attempted to integrate them with the full, incredible layered history here of this site. So go beneath the surface, you'll experience this incredibly layered history as you see an extraordinary, real and dynamic example of Cold War archaeology that'll give you a sense of the conflict's mood and atmosphere here in Scotland. I notice it forms a formidable shield as the outside world buff. Get about we not with your fist with how thick it actually is. It consists of 12 feet thick of concrete and steel supports, additional 10 feet of rock and soil piled on top, completely isolating us from the world above. What we've got here is this a recycled piece of London Underground tunnelling. And indeed many of the construction techniques and innovations that this bunker draws on do actually come from the London Underground. Original location of the original blast doors. Each of these would weigh over a metric ton, 1,000 kilograms, and may mean all that separated you from complete destruction above the surface to relative safety here beneath the ground. Behind these doors lay a world of complete secrecy, with the bunker here operating under the official Secrets Act. That meant the staff here can tell their own family or friends that friend on the site, or at least in the early years of the bunker, it only would be known by select few military and governmental personnel. Even in those early years of the bunker, many Edinburgh locals would have thought of this as nothing more than just a hole in the ground, reflecting the initial origins of this site as a quarry, which was used up until 1912, and the fact that no extensive housing was built in the area until the 1950s here in and around Clerici. Imagine, it would have been an incredibly intense environment here within Bunker. And this intensity was only further added to by the fact that every single word that you said here, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, would be constantly monitored by on-duty stenographers. I think there's one story that I want to tell you that will give you a real sense of just how intense this environment actually was. It said that there was a painter there, painting the ceiling above the operations well, when he drops a single drop of paint down into one of the plotting tables below. And that sends the entire bunker here into an immense panic. I'm not proud of anyone let's take a wee guess why that. And this drop of paint here happens to be exactly the same colour of these arrows here. It also happens when it falls to look exactly like one of these arrows in terms of how it lands. So it does mess up the work they're doing a wee bit. Because what happens is they mistake this to be an NA aircraft that they haven't been monitoring correctly. So they thought through not monitoring it correctly that they'd be doomed, that they'd be attacked, that there'd be devastation in the country would be bombed, and they made an absolutely crucial mistake. On my jacket here, I've got the crest of the Royal Observer Corps, and underneath they've got this motto, "Forewarned is forearmed." And that tells you that these monitoring efforts are seen as just as crucial of a part of defence as really anything else during that period. In the Scotland Sector Operations Centre, this is the key facility in Scotland for these monitoring efforts. So I'm sure you can imagine, life below the surface here was extraordinarily simple and exceedingly mundane. That meant simple eating arrangements, simple sleeping arrangements, and especially simple hygiene arrangements, as you really wouldn't have found anywhere to wash yourself here beneath the surface whatsoever. But nonetheless, the existence of a space like this, the ladies' restroom, still did provide an incredibly crucial escape from that intense environment all throughout the rest of the bunker. Even just having the chance to come here, a cup of tea or a meal was a key escape from such intensity. Although I have my hats a wee bit sceptical about this idea that something like a cup of tea may be enough to distract you from the fact that you yourself intentionally single-handedly responsible for stopping the outbreak of nuclear war. I'll leave that up to you though. Around this room, you found a number of rather plain, simple and stripped back period versions. Take things like lockers, camp bays, tier, and identification cabinet you would have commonly found across both bunkers as well as other important military facilities in both east and west. This is where you would have found your senior military officers to be looking over all of that data from the rest of the operation as well, and grand plotting tables and tow boards, and on top of that, in the case of particularly suspicious aircraft, they've been rigorously and independently monitoring the movements of those aircraft to determine whether they were a civilian aircraft, a senior ISA British training jet, or indeed a Soviet bomber with static action. So I'm sure you can imagine it being very loud in these rooms, orders constantly being shouted, logbooks filled, and telephones ringing. And I speak of this as the place where nuclear war could actually have broken out. It's these senior military officers who were authorised to respond to potential nuclear threats, or who may in dire circumstances have the ability to give the recommendation to the British government to launch a nuclear threat of their own. Originally here, you'd have found some angled blast-proof windows, and behind it was only a cam precision that stood between vigilance and the outbreak of complete nuclear disaster. For the cold winter months, November 1983, and Soviet observers spotted NATO aircraft leaving the hangars with nuclear arsenal ready to go. The NATO nuclear threat level is raised to DEFCON 1, the highest possible level, and higher in the heights it reached even during the peak of the Cuban Missile Crisis. It would seem that nuclear disaster was imminent. But it's all just a drill, just a NATO training exercise. So why do we care about this? Why do we remember it? It was because, crucially, the Soviets did not see it that way. They saw it as such a realistic training exercise it could be a covert guise under which to launch an actual nuclear attack. So they prepared their own weapons, ready to fire. In those cold winter days in November 1983, it only would have been a few decisions and identification cabins very much like these, again commonly found across both east and west, that actually would have prevented the outbreak of nuclear war. This room is a real fan favourite on our tours. I think you can see why. It's got such a creepy and eerie atmosphere about it, with those torched out ceilings from the fires in the 1990s. It's not just a fan favourite amongst those who come here on our tours though, it's also particularly a fan favourite amongst filmmakers. And this comes as part of the volunteer teamed focus here, of keeping this place not just to be a frozen time capsule, but giving it a sense of modern purpose. So not to emphasise any kind of creative functions, whether that be in film, whether that be in music, whether that be a dance, whether that be in art, whatever it is, whatever you can imagine, with a bit of it done here at the bunker. In terms of filming, what Pad done here at the bunker, don't know if any of you are familiar with BEC series Vigil, but then you're filming their third series recently, and they were filming a lot here at the bunker just in November and also in January, so I'm quite excited to see that come out. One thing that I also want to kind of emphasise before we go any further, it's this bunker here. We've got a traditional way of thinking about nuclear bunkers. That being as places where were there to be a nuclear strike, you would run here for safety and shelter to survive that strike. What's important to note here is when this facility is first constructed is this isn't entirely the case. It's more focused on defence here, with a secret aspect, and the fact it's underground is just as important as the fact that it has this ability to withstand a nuclear strike. So during this period, we're not thinking about things like maximum capacities and people actually being sheltered here from a nuclear attack. Then that's going to be an operate with skeleton crew is about 6 people for the night if required. However, as we go to this next stage, that's where that more traditional understanding of what a nuclear bunker is more appropriate. We're focused on survival and maximum capacities and things like that. It isn't very long at all, just 20 minutes to prepare. It's quite a strange time in this period to be a senior military officer, because you spent your entire career up until that point being explicitly trained for this purpose of defence, where that meant to defeat a threat, to shut it down completely, and to eliminate that threat. But with just 20 minutes or so to prepare, it became increasingly clear that in some cases, you wouldn't be able to adequately defend against a threat, and the best you could do was to simply endure that threat. And that meant that this facility had become focused on something far more plain and simple, that being mere survival. You can call it survival by administration or power by paperwork, but it's the governments that increasingly come to occupy this facility, the military leaving this facility to hide. Military only used this site as initial function for just 2 years. But to give you a sense of how redundant that initial military and defensive function is seen to be, there's about a 3-year period after this, which the facility sits completely empty before the government then move into this site. The military is reassigned to various other functions and to new facilities during this period, and one of these groups is reassigned to a new function is the Royal Observer Corps, who are given their new designated Scottish hub up in Aberdeenshire. Both from this initial use of the site as a military and flexible and this new focus on survival and governance, leave behind incredibly large war rooms, operation theatres, large mats, and instead we have rooms more like these. These were in small soundproof offices, originally wood-panelled, so you see some remnants of the original wood panel like just let up on the wall over there. And here staff have been working here at desks. It's quite an interesting story when you first entered this site, what happened during this period. You've gone to the reception, it would have been as you came in upstairs today, and then a receptionist when you came in would have put you a blindfold over your eyes at that stage. They would walk you downstairs and then they would have sat you down at a particular desk within the bunker. And then that's all you would have been able to see at the bunker, just that particular desk that you were working at and that particular project that you were working on. At those desks they're looking over scenario plans and 400, 500-page documents on what to do in the event of any particular nuclear attack. The core function of preparing these scenario plans is to stop a situation of anarchy from breaking out across the country. Whereas I'm sure you can imagine if a situation of anarchy just emerged, the perspective of the government is it becomes 10 times more difficult to respond adequately to an actual nuclear attack. And there's also a desire of the government to hang on to power for this situation with crisis. Well, they had to significantly enlarge the facility here during this period. This is when we start thinking about those maximum capacities, but the maximum capacity of this site in particular being 400. Significantly enlarged. It's now Scotland's largest nuclear facility at the time, and one of the largest of the UK at that. And within those 400 staff are split into two core functions. These primarily being public health initiatives, where naturally in the aftermath of a nuclear attack, there's going to be a public health emergency that quickly has to be got on top of and controlled. And on top of that, there's also a core function on the core focus of this facility is on resource distribution, supply chains and logistics, where every single civil servant stationed here is given specialist training and rationing in particular. These civil servants are, there's kind of an expectation here that were you to be here with this bunker, you'd spend 3 to 4 weeks here beneath the surface before it's deemed safe enough to go back above the surface. The levels of radiation would have settled sufficiently. Even despite that, you kept resources here at the bunker for about 12 weeks. That's in case you'd both underestimated how long you'd have to spend here beneath the surface for the levels of radiation had settled enough, or in case you'd underestimated how much of the local population in and around Edinburgh would actually have survived. I'm quite careful when I say in and around Edinburgh though, because although this facility is now transitioned from being Scotland's sector operations centre to Scotland's regional seat of government and coordinates these resource distribution efforts to the entire country, it itself can only give resources out to a small area in and around Edinburgh. So supported by a number of other facilities, one of these being at Anstruther, one of these being at Kirknewton, one of these being at East Kilbride in terms of the subsidiary bunkers that sit directly underneath this. There's also a number of important military facilities all throughout the rest of the country that give a small amount of supplies to get out to predominantly rural populations on top of that. It's quite a large team of facilities supporting this site's actual resource distribution. Power is incredibly important in a situation of nuclear crisis because without it, it's kind of one thing to be able to prepare these scenario plans and how to deal with almost any particular aspect of a nuclear assault. But it is nothing if you can't actually establish control and authority over whatever remains of the country. So now here in the BBC studio, where two BBC presenters have been stationed here at the bunker at any one given time, overlooking this BBC studio right here, responsible for getting emergency information out to the people of Scotland to give them the very best chance of survival in the event of a nuclear attack. The British public though as a whole were published just 4 minutes of warning in the event of a nuclear strike.
This is the Wartime Broadcasting Service. This country has been attacked with nuclear weapons. Communications have been severely disrupted, and the number of casualties and the extent of the damage are not yet known. We shall bring you further information as soon as possible. Meanwhile, stay tuned to this wavelength, stay calm, and stay in your own house. Remember, there's nothing to be gained by trying to get away. By leaving your homes, you could be exposing yourselves to greater danger. If you leave, you may find yourselves without food, without water, without accommodation, and without protection. We shall be on the air every hour on the hour. Stay tuned to this wavelength, but switch your radios off now to save your batteries. That is the end of this broadcast.
It's so incredibly calmly delivered, but so incredibly chilly. And how on earth are you supposed to stay calm under those circumstances? It seems a ridiculous idea. Most people wouldn't have gone to these extensive preparation efforts in their final moments, that they would want to spend those final minutes just with their families and their friends. There was a great understanding amongst the British public that when a message like this was to come over the radio, it really was it at that point. There was not much more that you could actually do. So that begs the question, why was the wartime broadcasting service then set up with this explicit purpose of giving the British public these survival instructions to give them the very best chance of survival in the event of a nuclear attack? There was very little that you could actually do. The reality on the inside was a little bit different. It was far more about providing the British public with a false sense of security. This was essential for the British government's nuclear preparations for both the aftermath and in the run-up to any potential nuclear assault. In terms of preparation, what's most famous in Britain is the Protect and Survive campaign. It's almost become a bit of a cultural symbol, with a Runrig song even being named after it. But what's most famous from it is the public service announcements that went out that started as cartoons, but very quickly turned chilly, and also the leaflets that were distributed to households advising you how to prepare for a potential nuclear attack. These would have taught you things such as how to build your own DIY nuclear bomb shelter. This would have consisted of a door, a couple cushions, maybe a sandbag or two if you were lucky, which would have given you absolutely no chance of survival, I can tell you that. So while the British public as a whole were promised 4 minutes of warning in the event of a nuclear attack, it sounds pretty good for you at first if you were to be stationed here at this particular nuclear bunker, because you actually get about 4 days of warning. That's in the run-up, because in the run-up to any potential nuclear attack, there's extensive negotiations taking place between nuclear parties to stop those actual attacks from taking place. That's when the nuclear threat level goes up and you start bringing more and more people into facilities like these. I talked about these BBC radio messages as primarily being oriented around providing a false sense of security. That's at least true for the one I played out to you that you would have heard in the initial run-up to a strike. But any subsequent broadcasts are then going out to your surviving population, and this is when these messages become incredibly crucial. You get any of your surviving population a real fighting chance at that stage. Is that the actual outbreak of nuclear war, the communications become incredibly important. This would be in your realm as your general post office and later British telecom engineers who here would have overseen a wide suite of teleprinters, cyber machines, switchboards and cable farms. These would allow the communication, for instance, the UK government to allow for a national UK response to a nuclear crisis to be coordinated, refers to the BBC to allow for any additional emergency information to reach this bunker. You can have a broadcast from that BBC studio right there. You can see it's like clearly as well with this BBC studio as a wee sort of addiction to the bunker. It's basically built into the roof here, for the changing role of this bunker over time. This is really one of my favourite spaces here within the bunker, because I'm sure you can see this is one of the places to make a good amount of stuff. This is all being generously donated to us by BT and consists of communications equipment that has come from other bunkers all throughout the rest of the UK. We've already begun a bit of work here within this room in terms of the actual restoration. There's been extensive painting over the past few weeks and also within the operations as well, and on top of that. And the next kind of stage as part of this is to begin putting all of this equipment back together. We also begin doing this over the next few months. And in terms of the other projects that we also have in mind, in the operations as well, we'll already get some bossing tables out there for you. And one of the great things about how the restoration has been progressing up until this stage is that they've really achieved a state of what you might call as stable ruin after 14 years of work, where now we can focus on adding historical character back to more spaces within the bunker. One of the real benefits of achieving this stage is we're able to clear up massive amounts of rubble from the bunker. And amongst that rubble, we found pieces of equipment and antiquities that have been incredibly important within the bunker's story. Operational hub, our plant room. This is where you have all your electrical equipment, the massive diesel generations coming here as this room. Also your ventilation comes via this room. Yeah, so there are standing here on the original floor, there's burst missile, it may surprise you to know, which feel so shiny be able to see your own reflection in. You can see quite clearly as well that a number of pieces of equipment have been taken away from the bunker over time. This comes from a number of graves that are held here in the bunker in the 1990s, with all the number of break-ins through copper thieves over that period. This though actually turns out to be about the heartwarming story, because many of these people that came to the bunker in the 1990s here are graves still actually live here in the same local area within Edinburgh. And they go home after one of these tours that they still come on to this day, and they have a bit of a realisation. That being that somewhere in their house, there's pieces of equipment that they took away from the bunker still sitting. So they get into contact, us say they got these pieces of equipment, and these are some of the best preserved pieces of equipment we've ever been able to get our hands on, because crucially they did withstand any damage from the fires. So, you always want something like this, just sitting as a coffee table, on a window or something like that. This bunker is built quite unusually. It's built as in a buck around the structure and then completely buried under box and soil. One of the effects of that is that it comes with a prominent hill on top. The year is 1963. It's a time of great social change here in Britain. You see the rise of a number of different social groups. Some of these are anti-nuclear protest groups, and one of these groups is called the Spies for Peace. And they organise a break-in into Regional Seat of Government number 6, based in Reading, just outside of London. And they sneak in and out completely undetected. No one knows how they did it to this day. And because of that, they're able to expose this entire network of regional seats of government, secret bunkers like this all across the country. And the public here is absolutely furious. You see major protests break out at bunkers all across the country, including this particular bunker. These are primarily organised by a campaign for nuclear disarmament, with the real height of their powers during this period, a membership of well over 100,000. What exactly are they protesting against? Well, they're protesting against this idea in the British nuclear bunker building system that these capacity and that these bunkers should be designed to protect only a small core of the population, rather than more active effort being made to protect more of the population. We do know a lot, however, about how these fires actually play out. The first thing that RDH had to determine was if there was no one here beneath the surface. And as soon as they determined that, they said the fires would be too unsafe to actually fight. So it was left to burn. It's left to burn for 3 whole days, burning at such temperatures that it burnt through concrete, as you can see for the ceiling over there. It even burnt through glass, causing glass to melt, roll, and then fuse with the floor. This, though, actually turns out to be a bit blessing in the sky from the restoration of First Fidelis. This is an incredibly interesting technique you could do using glass to map out the rough location of where rooms would be within the structure. Very useful when we didn't have access to much information about the actual site during the early years of restoration. You can see how much work was actually required in this on the site here. The entire section of ground had to be stable for standing off, massive amounts of rubble had to be removed, the entire rooms had to be reconstructed, stairwells rebuilt, asbestos had to be dealt with, and to top that, had to be re-drained and then also be watertight. This took an immense amount of effort, taking more than 14 years of work and more than 50,000 hours of work by our encyclopedia of volunteers over here. Bunker. Our volunteer scheme is now very well established, so the third iteration has been running in this current form for about 3 years. We've had more than 800 volunteers pass through the scheme. We operate a skills-based volunteering scheme here, where people come from all over the world for typically quite brief placements here to learn a skill such as joinery or electric work or painting here. And then they take those skills with them beyond the time in the bunker to use them in their own personal and professional lives. In exchange for doing 20 hours of work here on the site, they're offered free housing. And this allows us to make massive amounts of profit and massive amounts of progress with the restoration over the past 3 years in particular. Our volunteer team will still be deeply integrated into the restoration that enters the new next stage, focused on historical character. And these tours, when they began last September, were really the first step of this new stage of the restoration, focused on bringing back historical character back to more spaces here within Bunker. So thank you for coming so much, thank you so much for coming along today. The money for your ticket does go directly towards supporting these efforts. Hope you've enjoyed your tour. More than anything, I hope you've learned something.
So folks, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you want more of these deep dives, please let me know down in the comments.